Have it up. Can you have that announcement, please?
Buenos días, bienvenidos. Tenemos interpretación disponible en español. Para poder escuchar la junta en español de la Comisión de Vivienda, por favor visiten www.webex.com o pueden llamar al número de teléfono 1415-655-0001. El código de acceso es 2469-718-7587 con la clave vivienda. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we can start with the roll.
Chair Gonzalez,
Present.
Commissioner Davila,
Present.
Commissioner Abraham,
Present.
Commissioner Keemer, Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Arndt,
Present.
Commissioner Alanis, Commissioner Hinojosa,
Here.
Commissioner Sanchez. She's not with us, so we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. We will start with citizens to be heard. Any public comment?
Yes, we have two people signed up to speak. Sharon.
Yes, did you need to do the meeting protocol or should I introduce the first speaker?
Sharon, if you have the speaker on the line, I think we can jump in.
Okay, certainly, one moment. The first speaker is Peggy Pena and I will connect her right away.
Ready?
Yes, please continue. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Peggy Pena, Chair Gonzalez and members of the Housing Commission. I come before you today because many of us in the community are very concerned about the $100 million reduction in the amount dedicated for the housing bond. On September 29th, many of us watched as Assistant City Manager Laurie Houston reported to the City Council that $250 million would be allocated. Then 2 weeks later, she reported the amount would be reduced to $150 million, stating that the other sources would be used to leverage the loss of those funds. What happened? We don't recall a majority of council members publicly state that the amount allocated for housing should be reduced by $100 million. What backroom discussions have been taking place? Where's the transparency? This feels like a shell game. We hear those funds will now be allocated to parks. Are parks more important than meeting the basic needs of shelter? Do you agree with that reallocation? As members of the Housing Commission, could you adequately explain how these other leveraging resources will meet the housing needs in our city? How can we ethically justify leveraging $57 million from Saha when we know the wait list is at least 30,000 people and numerous properties are in dire need of renovation? We need more money for housing, not less. What city staff proposed is not clear to the public. Is it clear to you? Our hope is for members of the commission to be the greatest advocates for increased funding, not settle for less. We have seen decades of millions of dollars of tax breaks, some good for 75 years, to big developers that are gentrifying our neighborhoods and who have not built housing that is truly affordable to the working class residents of our city. Council members and city staff have gladly opened the floodgates of tax breaks for developers, yet won't stand up for the most vulnerable in our community. We have a chance to make up for those lost funds, to champion deeply affordable housing. Let us remember the mantra documented in the San Antonio Housing Facility Framework. Everyone, needs a place to call home. Will you be the champions for working class people in our city? We await your next steps because this is a moral call to action. Will you step up and answer the call? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peña. Rebecca Flores? Chair, we don't have Rebecca connected right now, so we're proposing to move through the first item, and we'll try and reach her and let you know when she's on. Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on to item number 1, approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Could I get a motion?
I will move approval of the minutes.
We have a motion.
Quick question on the minutes. I think it has Commissioner Davila presenting on the framework, but I think that was me, right? Last meeting? I think it was just me presenting on the framework, unless that was a separate meeting. Oh, okay, got it.
I did have a question though, on page 4 of 9, the second paragraph to the bottom. I believe this was Commissioner Sanchez that requested clarification on targeted industry.
Is that correct? I feel like Commissioner Sanchez wasn't here that day. Do we get some support on that? We'll verify that and make the change if she was present.
This is Pete. I also have a correction. I was not present at the meeting. That was Nicole Cuyasso on behalf of the trust.
Thanks, Commissioner. Any other corrections? If not, we have a motion with approved amendments.
Yes.
And is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the last meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Motion carries. So the next item is a briefing on the SHIP and next steps, and that will be from Ian.
Good morning. How are you, Housing Commission Chair? Ian Benavides, Assistant Director with the Neighborhood Housing Services Department. I'm going to provide the Commission an update and next steps on the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan. First slide, please. As way of background, and I know we've all seen this a lot, we presented on this item several times, but just as a refresher, the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan is building off of the Housing Policy Framework, and this document was accepted by Council in September of 2018. It outlined 24 strategies across 5 key action areas, and those were to develop a coordinated housing system, increase city investment, increase affordable housing production, rehabilitation, preservation, protect and promote neighborhoods, and ensure accountability to the public. Those 24 strategies, I'll show in a couple of slides. We were able to start on a lot of them. Some of them needed a little bit more detail. So we provided that to the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan, as well as incorporated other housing-related policies from other planning documents. In addition, the Housing Policy Framework set a 10-year housing production and preservation target of 18,681. And we know as staff, when we started tracking our pipeline of projects against that goal, we were on track to exceed that within the first 4 or 5 years. So one of the major things in the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan is recalibrating our housing targets based off of the need in the community. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about the Housing Policy Framework progress to date. So of those policies that were included in the Housing Policy Framework, 50% of those, or 12 of those strategies, have been completed. 5 of those strategies are underway, and 7 of those strategies are being transferred into the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan. Again, that continuity and building off of what was done in the Housing Policy Framework. I will say the most recent strategy to be completed is the hiring of our Chief Housing Officer, who's with us today, Carmona over there, which we had the opportunity to have him introduced to the Housing Commission at the last meeting. Next slide. talk a little bit about our unit targets and that we are on track to exceed those that were identified in the housing policy framework. So as you can see from this graphic, overall, just raw units, the housing policy framework had a target of 18,861. And in this short time frame, which I think is a compliment and an accomplishment of many of the entities in this room, we have already surpassed that raw number with 18,965 units in our pipeline. It's over 3 years. You can see in here on this chart from rental preservation, rental production, homeownership preservation, homeownership production, the percentage complete to date. So we are definitely on track to exceed these within the 10-year period. Next slide. We also talked at a previous Housing Commission meeting about the need in the community. So I won't, restate all of this, but we identified 95,000 households, which we stated are most at risk for housing instability. And we identified the needs of the community at various AMI levels. So how many households at those different AMI levels? And I'll stress this in another slide, but the majority of the need identified was below 50% of the area median income. Next slide. We also talked last meeting about how we are going to address these 95,000 households. Production and preservation is one strategy to address homeownership instability. The other one is to increase household wages and subsidize income. So we know that there is a lot of work being done by our partners here at the city and partners across the county that are making an impact on household incomes and making housing more affordable. So when we talk about increasing household wages or subsidizing incomes, we're looking at things like public assistance. So housing choice vouchers and other kind of housing vouchers that make housing more accessible to residents and households. And then benefits navigation, connecting residents to services that may be offered throughout the community that help increase household incomes and make housing more affordable to them. We also want to stress job training. The city of San Antonio has made a significant investment in the San Antonio Ready to Work program. And we know that that is one part that was identified in the housing policy framework of why we have this imbalance between household incomes and rising household costs. And then when we took at producing and preserving income restricted units, that is something that we're most familiar with as a department, but we're looking at tools like gap financing and tax credits to produce and preserve owner-occupied and rental units. So we'll continue that. And then we want to make sure that we leverage the private sector. So we know that within our community, many of the residents are currently living in affordable housing that's not necessarily rent restricted, but does provide affordable housing options for our community. We want to expand those through opportunities like accessory dwelling units, home sharing, and changes to the UDC, which can increase the number of unsubsidized affordable housing units in our community. Next slide. We also talked about, based off of our approach, the new housing targets for the strategic housing implementation plan would be 28,000, little over 28,000, 28,094, which roughly equates to over 2,800 units a year. I'll go over the targets here in another slide, but another significant part of these new housing targets, besides the increase of 10,000 units, is the targeting of the AMI levels for these new housing targets. Again, specifically focused on 50% and below AMI to match up with the housing needs identified through our analysis. Next slide. So when we look at home ownership and rental preservation targets, as I previously stated, the focus is on the 50% and below of the area median income for both ownership, preservation, and rental production and preservation. We do include production goals for home ownership between 60 and 120% of the area median income. And while rental production does stop at 60% AMI to reflect the adoption of the definition of affordability by this commission, we will continue to track 60 to 80% AMI units. We know that there is a need for them in the community and that they are an important tool of being able to produce those lower AMI units. We also talked last time about in that production target at 0 to 30% AMI, including 1,000 units of permanent supportive housing. And we'll work very closely with our Department of Human Services and our continuum of care at SARA to be able to accomplish those rental production for permanent supportive housing targets. Next slide. So really quickly, as I previously stated, the new targets by AMI, you can see a very large percentage of these are 50% and below of the area median income. Almost half are 0 to 30, and almost 75% are 0 to 50% AMI. Again, this reflects the need that we identified in the community. Next slide. When we look at the distribution of these targets by production and preservation, we can see an emphasis on preservation, and this is also something that differs from the housing policy framework. We do know that there is a big need to preserve affordable housing options within the community, and that's reflected in our targets at 55% of our goals being preservation. Next slide. How will we track these targets? We will continue to come to this Housing Commission monthly to provide updates on how we're doing, not just with production and preservation, but also our partners at workforce training, as well as the San Antonio Housing Authority and the Department of Human Services for benefit navigation. We'll provide quarterly reports to the Planning and Community Development Committee, which is the council committee that we report to on the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan and housing items. And then we will also work with the Housing Commission's Public Dashboard and Annual Report Committee to make sure that we have these resources available online and a report that comes out annually to inform the public on our progress. Next slide. So again, these are the intervention categories. These are the targets for those. Those are the metrics of what we'll be tracking. And then those are the responsible parties that we will be working with going forward. Next slide. So to continue this conversation for today, we want to talk a little bit about our 10-year funding plan. So we've set the goals, we've identified the need, and we've broken down those goals into AMI categories and production and rehabilitation targets. What we did next is we analyzed our pipeline of existing affordable housing projects that I talked about at the beginning of the slide, and we looked at the average subsidy per unit by AMI level and program, and the funding required by that funding source and those program usages. And the fact that we have made such good progress as a community against those housing policy framework goals allowed us to have a lot of data to analyze in terms of what that average subsidy is. The new housing targets and the housing policy and the strategic housing implementation plan of 28,000 units represents approximately $3.3 billion of housing investment over the next 10 years. And over the next 10 years, we know that we will need to leverage sources to get to that $3.3 billion. And that would mean approximately $1 billion over the next 10 years of locally directed funding to leverage $2.3 billion in funding. I will say that this is a 10-year plan, so there's a projection that goes into these, and we'll be able to adjust based on market conditions, new funding that may become available over these next 10 years. And that's the benefit of being able to track these things on a quarterly and annual basis, is being able to be flexible and adjust. Next slide. So when we looked at the funding sources that were available to us, of course, we were looking very closely at the housing bond, which I think was brought up in public comment, and it's also the process is about to be underway here pretty soon. Those are voter-approved bond funds that can be used for various affordable housing activities, which again are going through the process right now. We looked at our affordable housing budget, and this is the budget that we typically look at for our city department as we work with council annually. Those include general funds. That's city's general fund revenue that we use for our city programs right now. Our federal funds in terms of home and CDBG that we receive from the federal government, from the Housing and Urban Development. Our affordable housing fund. These are funds that the city will continue to accrue over several years. These are rebates that are paid back to the city for projects that may have received C-CHIP incentives or tax increment reinvestment zone funding. City fee waivers. This commission has already received a briefing on the city fee waiver program at their last meeting. So I think you all are familiar with our city fee waiver program and that funding. And then our recapitalized funds. So we have issued low interest loans for several affordable housing programs, and we do continue to get a return on that funding, and it allows us to stretch that funding. In addition, you'll also see at our funding plan some one-time funding, home ARPA. This is one-time federal dollars that we will be using for housing. It is a significant amount of money, so it was included in this plan. Tax exemptions. Tax exemptions play an important role in being able to provide affordable housing and projects throughout our community. And so we'll look at developments that have utilized tax exemptions to include affordable housing units. And this can be done by example by the San Antonio Housing Trust and Bexar County Housing Trust. The San Antonio Housing Trust does do funding rounds, and these are available through the income generated by the San Antonio Housing Trust projects. So we'll be working with them into the future on how we use those funds and what they're targeted for. Federal capital funds, and these are funds that are received by the San Antonio Housing Authority. And these are the funds that they use for the rehabilitation of their public housing. Tax increment reinvestment zones. These are developer initiated tax increment reinvestment zones. We have these zones created in parts of town traditionally where infrastructure has not been extended to. And so by creating a TIR zone, we're able to reimburse those developers for extending infrastructure and in return, providing single family affordable home options for residents of those districts. And then, of course, you'll see leverage funding sources, which makes up a bulk of our funding. And these are the funding sources that are typically used to finance the bulk of affordable housing projects. And these include housing tax credits, HUD financing, such as 221D4s, conventional debt that a developer may take on, and private activity bonds. And then we have heard from council and our community about additional resources that we need to leverage. These weren't included in our projections because they really are a project by project basis that need to qualify for them. But when possible, we will leverage city-owned assets, historic tax credits, and base energy funding that can be another layer on top of some of these projects. And we'll be tracking those funding sources as we go forward. Next slide. So if you were able to tune in to City Council, Lori Houston did give a presentation on the bond. And in that presentation, she shared the 5-year funding plan and how the housing bond fits into our overall 10-year housing plan. In the housing policy framework, it originally included two $125 million housing bonds, which would be a total of $250 million. In looking at our pipeline of projects and looking at the funding sources that are available, and looking at our average subsidy per unit, staff was able to adjust our housing bond ask to two $150 million bond issuances for a total of $300 million, so still more than the housing policy framework. But because we're able to leverage these other sources, we're able to meet our housing targets within these 10 years. Our affordable housing budget that I just went through is listed. Our home ARPA funds, a one-time of $18 million. Developer-initiated TERS, based on developer-initiated TERS that have been submitted to the city over the past 5 years. San Antonio Housing Trust rounds, projecting out, working with the San Antonio Housing Trust, and looking at our pipeline of tax-exempt projects over the past 5 years. Our federal capital funds, these are funds that are being used by the San Antonio Housing Authority. They're not being redirected. They're just funds that they receive. And then, of course, the leverage funds that I talked about. It is important to note that this is we feel is a very conservative funding plan. I listed out some funding sources that we may be able to leverage to take our funding even further, such as historic tax credits or base energy funding. There's also a federal infrastructure bill in the pipeline that, if approved, would provide significant funding to the San Antonio Housing Authority and other housing authorities to increase their rehabilitation of their projects. Next slide. The Housing Commission also received a draft of our strategic housing implementation plan yesterday. So in that, you will see a list of 36 strategies that we've included in the implementation plan that include the continuation of the strategies from the housing policy framework, as well as strategies related to housing from a variety of other planning documents. And we did this with the intention of making sure that all the work and effort that had gone into those other planning efforts was carried forward as we move forward in our strategic housing implementation plan. And we categorized all of those strategies under the same housing policy framework focus areas. Next slide. So I won't go through all of these, but they are within your SHIP document that you've received. So if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them. In the strategic housing implementation document, you'll also see at the very beginning a list of the stakeholders that we've engaged to draft these. It was a very extensive process with a lot of back and forth, but I think what it resulted in are implementation strategies that are thoughtful and identifying who partners should be. Next slide. And then when we talk about the adopting partner responsibilities, the biggest lift, and I think the strategic portion of the strategic housing implementation plan is really working together with the major entities within Bexar County that can have a significant impact on housing. So of course that includes the city of San Antonio and our various departments, not just neighborhood housing services, but DHS, DSD, and under the guidance of Mark Ramona, our new chief housing officer, we hope to continue the synergy within our departments and across these entities. And those entities include the San Antonio Housing Trust, San Antonio Housing Authority, and Bexar County. And so for each one of these entities, we've highlighted the focus of these entities going forward and where they can lead strategically and some very important initiatives. So as the San Antonio Housing Trust, I'll just pull out one from each so that we can go through this. Supporting a land banking program is something that the San Antonio Housing Trust is in a prime position to be able to help our community with, specifically to support affordable multifamily rental development. For Saha, we know that there's a shortage of vouchers, not just for our housing authority, but across the country. So we want to be able to work with them on how we can advocate for more housing vouchers within the community. And for Bexar County, we have been working very closely with them during the pandemic, during the eviction process. and how we can help residents. And we want to continue that work, both with data collection and transparency, as well as improvements that we can make to the eviction process. Next slide. Going forward, we do have a public input process for the strategic housing implementation plan. Again, we've built off a lot of work done in these source planning documents that include our For Everyone Home anti-displacement strategy, our housing policy framework, OHPs, opportunity at risk, the SA Tomorrow plan. We have worked with over 80 stakeholders on drafting these strategies, and we've had multiple public meetings, including presentations at this board, as well as the city's planning and community development. Upcoming, we'll be having 3 public meetings. These will be hybrid meetings. They'll be in person and virtual. We will also record a presentation that will be available online so that individuals can view at their leisure. And then we will post these documents online for review starting November 1st. We'll have the ship draft in English and in Spanish, as well as a highlight document that is much shorter than the document that you all received in English and in Spanish. And then if individuals would like a print copy, we'll be able to accommodate that as well. On that website, you'll also be able to enter in public input. There'll be a form where you can provide feedback to staff so that we can make changes where necessary and collect input. Next slide. Our public meetings will start on the 1st, and then they'll continue on the 4th and the 9th. They'll be on UTSA's West Side Community Center, St. Philip's College, and the Ego Library. Again, these will be in person and virtual so that you can stream them and view them from anywhere in our community. And they will be from 6 to 7 p.m. Next slide. We will try and get the word out about these public meetings and the ability to comment publicly on the draft with our Housing Commission's Public Engagement and Outreach Subcommittee. We'll look to see if we can distribute the communication via email, social media, and flyers. And then we'll make sure that all the draft material and flyers are shared with our SHIP stakeholders, with City Council, with the Housing Commission, and with our neighborhood associations. And then for our approval process, we brought this document to this Housing Commission several times. Tomorrow, we plan to go to the city's Planning and Community Development Council Subcommittee. Then we plan to have a City Council B session next week before taking this item for full City Council consideration early December. And I have a timeline of this on the next slide. And then real quickly, can you go back?
Sorry.
The other entities will be working with their boards. The San Antonio Housing Trust is going through some board formation right now. We've had conversations with Ed at the San Antonio Housing Authority, as well as Bexar County, on when we can approach their boards and commissioners court to brief them and adopt this policy in coordination with the city of San Antonio. Next slide. So here's what the next steps and timeline looks like. So we've got Housing Commission here today, Planning Community Development tomorrow. Our public input begins on November 4th. As well as our public meetings. We'll have B session on the 3rd. We'll close our public comment period on the 15th, and then we'll be going to council for council adoption on December 2nd. Next slide. That concludes my briefing. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ian. I have quite a few questions, and I suspect my commissioners do as well. But let me start with a citizen who has been holding. So if Rebecca Flores, if you're queued up and listening, we're here for you. You have 3 minutes.
I think I'm queued up. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Rebecca Flores, and I want to thank you for listening to my comments. Why cut $100 million from the housing bond? Who did that? What is the commission going to do about this reduction? It went from $250 million to $150 million almost overnight. This money could really address the housing needs of those in the lowest income categories in this city. These categories have never been addressed by SAHA nor the San Antonio Housing Trust. SAHA has thousands of people on its waiting list, and the Housing Trust has given away millions in property tax exemptions for decades to come, to the benefit of residents in the 80% AMI category. The $100 million cuts in the bond might be used to address those in the greatest need, those with no income, those who are in $2.13 an hour as waiters, those who are in $7.25 an hour, those who do day labor, battered women and children in need of immediate shelter, and so on. Further, I question the continued use of the San Antonio New Braunfels Metro 60% to 100% AMIs, a figure that is the average middle income of households in San Antonio and New Braunfels. This is not a true picture of our reality in San Antonio. The following data is taken from the United Census Study, American Community Survey of 2019. The 60 to 100% AMI for a household of 3 in the San Antonio, New Braunfels metro area is $62,355, whereas for San Antonio, it is almost $10,000 less at $53,751. When we look at ethnicity and race, the AMI for a family of 3 at the 60% to 100% AMI is even lower. Anglo families of 3 in San Antonio earn $66,915, but when you include New Braunfels data, it increases to $76,745. Hispanos in San Antonio, family of 3 earn $47,637, but including New Braunfels, it increases to $53,107. For African Americans in San Antonio, it is $45,834, including New Braunfels, it increases to $55,000. I urge you to use the San Antonio figures alone, since this will be a San Antonio City bond. Maybe by doing that, we will in fact build for those who really need housing. Gilbert Garcia, in his column today in the San Antonio Express News, wrote the following, and I quote, "Bond programs provide the city with one chance every 5 years to swing for the fences, to address massive needs that perpetually outpace our resources. It is responsible, not short-sighted, to challenge assumptions about where that money should go," unquote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Flores. Let me start with a few questions, Ian, and then I'll open it up to my colleagues here. Just, regarding some of the, the partner responsibilities, let me start there. So you have, these 3 entities listed, and I know that we do have a new housing director here. And I know, Mark, you're new, you've only been here a few weeks, but one of the charges of the commission, and I listed a number of times in talking to my commissioners and some of the staff members, there is a tremendous desire to see a coordinated effort. And I know that you're on the job, but can you give us an idea of how that's going?
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. So I've been on the job about 3 weeks, but what I'm noticing, what I'm seeing is I think the elements that we need in a coordinated system are here. I think what I'm beginning to see are what are the natural linkages between systems, and how educated are people on, how transportation can have an impact on what you're doing, how another system can have an impact on what you're doing. I think also I'm learning more about what the focus is for some of these partner groups, the large partner agencies. And in doing so, I can see where there's alignment. So my goal is, as I look at all of these systems and I look at what's important to them, what's focused on their mission, I'm trying to see how we can make connections to have everyone pushing in the same direction. The good news is that most everyone that I've talked to agrees with the goals of the ship and agrees with the framework. And I think it's just going to be a question of how we can, when it gets to actual work, to the implementation side of it, how are we going to make that happen and how are we going to achieve goals? I think what the ship does is put targets out. It gives a roadmap for how that's going to happen. And then I think it's where the work begins is talking with systems and systems that are not listed as well, nonprofit developers, others as well, to see how it all comes together in a coordinated. Something you and I've talked about before, and I think that needs to be mentioned, is that I think a lot of this will take a multidisciplinary approach. And so you'll have a lot of different types of disciplines. You want to try to find what organizations do what well, and that's who can be charged with working in certain parts of the system. So those are some of the things that I'm learning, but I'm hearing a lot of positivity in terms of how to move forward and a willingness to make this work.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I know, but I do think that it was one of the primary discussions that we had was around having coordination. And what I have learned is while with a lot of these entities, we may not have a lot of momentum politically, but when we focus on a particular issue, we make tremendous progress. And so I think that the focusing on this issue of housing that we all believe is a priority for all of our citizens, we can make some progress. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to address that because it is sort of been a priority amongst many of the people here. So thank you for a little bit of a idea of how it's going so far.
Thank you, Chair. And I think you make an important point around coordination. I think that's surfaced as not so much an issue, but how are we going to do that? What does that look like? How do we begin coordination? And I think that's why looking at what are the natural linkages is a starting point for that. Keep in mind that this is over a 10-year period. And so how these systems will evolve and develop is a part of the equation as well.
Great. Well, thank you. I know you've only been here 3 weeks and 10 years is a long, hopefully there's not an end point. But I did just want to give you an opportunity to address the commission. Just another question I have, Ian, is regarding some of the funding strategies. And I think that's been on the forefront of everybody's mind. Given, the expectation of the 250, now we're down to 150. I believe that we can make incredible strides with the reduced amount, but some of it is seems to be still in flux, and that's also just regarding the ARPA dollars that you're showing here 18 million, but hasn't that changed even in the last few days? I saw today in the paper an additional 30 million for.
I'm going to let Veronica Soto, our director, answer the questions about the ARPA.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Veronica Soto. Very nice to see you all here. Great question. So the ARPA, American Recovery Plan Act, it's actually a multi-billion-dollar program, and there are different categories of that funding. So the city is not the only recipient of ARPA funds because there's funding slated for school districts, community colleges, a lot of other entities. So when we talk about ARPA, we are talking about different funds that come to the city. So what you see in the slide in front of you that has the home ARPA dollars, the home program is a HUD program. And so there are dollars that the city received through home that are part of that billion-dollar program. So that's the 18 million that you see up there. The actual allocation is 20 million, but there's some admin costs. So we're only counting what can actually be put toward construction and development of housing. So that's the home ARPA funds. In addition, the city received state and local recovery funds. And these are funds that are going to counties as well as municipalities. And the city last week at a B session started the process by which those state and local recovery funds from ARPA are going to be utilized. So the city is in the process of having a series of public meetings. I have heard that it's going to be about 9 community input sessions for how the city should utilize the remainder of that funding. Now, the city has utilized some of that funding already for what we have called recovery loss. So there are a lot of things we didn't get to do as a city because of COVID. There are impacts to our general fund budget because of that, as we lost a lot of revenue, especially like the hotel revenue. And so we had to recover from those impacts. So that was phase 1. What remains is just over 200 million for the city of San Antonio that will be decided. And there was no presentation, no staff recommendation other than a category on utilities that will be decided based on all this community input. So yes, there's additional money that the city does have not reflected on this 10-year funding plan, because at this moment, we do not know if some of that money will be utilized for housing. can some of that local, state and local recovery funding from ARPA be utilized in housing? Yes. Is that what the community will want and ask for? We don't know. The final plan for those ARPA dollars, the state and local recovery funds, is going to be sometime in January, and it aligns with what we're trying to do with the housing bond as well. So there is an opportunity to add more to the column here. Should the community request that the state and local recovery money be utilized toward housing, we could add it. But at this point, other than recommendation this week for utility assistance out of that, there hasn't been a set aside for the 200 million or so.
Thank you. And so this 18 million reflects what I understood to be a requirement of 20 million to go to permanent supportive housing. Okay, and you mentioned there was some admin costs there as well, which is why it's 18 and not 20. Okay, but that has to go to permanent supportive housing, not what could be considered less than 60%.
So the permanent supportive housing is great question. The guidance for the home ARPA funds, so home funds from HUD always have to be used toward housing, which is why they're reflected here because we're talking about affordable housing. So the home program has to be used for affordable housing. The guidance that came out about a month ago is very specific that it has to serve eligible populations who happen to be families having housing insecurity, experiencing homelessness, domestic violence victims, and permanent supportive housing is one of the eligible activities for that population. And so home funds, for those who use them, may not always serve that population that is at the brink of homelessness. And so we have to use it for that. So that's why permanent supportive housing, because it's an eligible population, is what we have been talking about. Plus, we know from the data that there is a dearth of PSH, permanent supportive housing. You saw the number from Ian. There's a goal of 1,000 PSH units over the next 10 years. And this money is exactly the kind of money that can be used to meet that goal. So that's why it's included. And that's why we'd like to set aside that funding for PSH in our community.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I have a lot of other questions, but let me turn it over, and I'll start here with Commissioner Davila. So following up on that discussion about the funding plan, I know in the SHIP, there's a lot of strategies that are around the supportive services component of affordable housing. And if we're focusing on developing units for families and individuals that are at that extremely low income end of the spectrum of incomes, those are the folks that need the support the most. And so I'm wondering, out of these dollars, what of those dollars would be able to support supportive services, resident services? Because in order to make a property affordable and keep rents affordable, adding a full-time resident services coordinator into the budget drives up the cost. So I'm curious if maybe those state and local recovery funds may be an option to fund the supportive services. And then I also encourage us to look to our healthcare systems to see how they may be able to support the actual supportive services component.
Yes, that's a great point. And it's something that we've looked at very closely, because when the need was identified at those lower AMI levels, that was the first thought that came through our mind too. Especially when we're talking about permanent supportive housing, the construction of the unit is one part, something that, you know, I think we are positioned to do. We can build, we can help our community, our development community be able to build. The services side of things is where we're going to have to get creative and start leveraging some of those funds. So you're absolutely right. We can leverage some of those federal funds. We have ongoing conversations right now, and I know Mark is having ongoing conversations too with our continuum of care with our Department of Human Services. And so we're looking at opportunities to be able to fund those supportive services in the future. I think permanent supportive housing is definitely a strategy where we are going to need to come together as a community, identify those funds, identify partners that may need additional capacity within our community. We just approved funding for our first on-site PSH development last year. And so this is going to be a heavy ramp up to 1,000 units over the next 10 years. And so those are things we are going to be looking at. And so City of San Antonio, which is going to be NHSD in partnership with DHS, those are ongoing right now. So we are looking at sources of funding to make sure that we've got those on-site services.
Thank you. And I'm talking even more broadly, not just the permanent supportive housing, but affordable housing units that serve people that are at 30%, 50%, 60%. There's definitely a need for funding to support somebody on site to provide the supportive services that residents need to access.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. And I was kind of using PSH as an example, but you're absolutely right. Even units that aren't PSH, but do have on-site services, that is something that we are working with our partners on specifically to identify additional funding for those. And then I think Mark wants to add something. Really quickly on his way up, Chair, I know that you talked about coordination. There's a strategy in here for an assessment that LISC is doing, which is looking at every aspect of the housing system. And I think once that's completed, they'll be able to bring this to you. And so, the big partners is one part of the coordination, which I think we're doing a much better job at, but understanding all those downstream impacts of all the capacity we need to build, which is kind of getting to your point, Commissioner Davila, that is a study that's currently underway. And when we have those findings, we'll be able to bring them to the commission. That'll help our community.
Do you have a timeline for that, Ian?
I will get back with you. I think last time I checked, it should be done early this first quarter. So.
Okay, and so hopefully that can be
Yes.
on our briefings. Go ahead, Ron.
Commissioner Davila, the other thought I had was, as you know, but through my knowledge of just the local nonprofit sector, there are a lot of supportive services and people that do certain supportive services really well. That's where I think on a coordination side, that's a great opportunity for us. And I'm not just thinking PSH. PSH will have almost built-in supportive services that are going to be available, some of them through local government, state government, et cetera. But I think it's on the affordable side, where, I've seen, when I ran Haven for Hope and we had the terraces, the ability for nonprofit partners to come in and provide services that were already in their budget, and part of what they were doing made a huge difference, benefits navigators, a lot of different kinds of services that can be provided. So your comment's not lost on me. And that's kind of a thought that I had in terms of a coordinated linkage with that sector.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions on this side first? No? Not on this side. All right, Commissioner A, go ahead.
It should be the.
Thank you. One question is on the available flyers and that for the SHIP public input plan. When will they be available and where can you get them? Some of us on the PEO subcommittee volunteered to distribute them in person. And so I'd really like to know when that's available because the winter is so short.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we'll be setting up a meeting if it's not already on your calendar to work with you on that distribution. We've got a draft of the document already. We're working on that summary document and getting it translated into Spanish right now. And then we hope to have it posted we will have it posted on our website November 1st. So that'll be the date that everything is available. And then we'll work with the committee over the next 2 weeks on how we push it out.
Great, thank you. And my other question or just observation, I guess, is on page 13. Anyways, it talked about adopting partner responsibilities, and I understand that responsibility part of it, but also how does the nonprofit sector work in here? guess we can't use the term responsibility there, but how do they fit into this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we will be highlighting in the actual document itself. This was more to just highlight the adopting partner responsibilities. But we know that our nonprofits play a very, very significant role in being able for us to deliver this. So building their capacity, whether they're developers or they provide on-site services, is definitely critical to this. And so anything that we as entities are doing, we need to make sure that they've got the capacity to be able to help us deliver on this. So we have had lots of conversations with our nonprofit developers, specifically our Chodos, and we are going to be working with them as we roll out a lot of these strategies. So they are identified in the strategies as partners in many of these things. So we have not lost the importance of them being a part of this ecosystem. So it'll be something that's called out specifically in the plan about the role that they play.
Keemer?
Thank you. So quick question. So for the community sessions that you mentioned, there were 9 for the ARPA funds and there are 3 for SHIP. So is there cross, like, I guess, gathering of information in both, a way to do both? Because I worry, like, for a regular community member, right, who's not super engaged, who's not accessible or easily online, if you go to one meeting and then you find out, oh, there's a SHIP meeting, you know, how do you keep track of that? Or how do you make sure that communication is shared across both, or ideas that are shared?
We can work with our GPA department to see when we host those meetings that we can reference each other's. And then we'll also make sure that on our website and maybe we will have a recording available. We will make sure that our meetings are available to stream online. So if you can't physically be at both meetings, and then we can put information available on the website, whether there's summary documents there that are accessible. And then of course, we would be able to print documents if people need them. So if they want to provide comments physically, they could do that as well.
I have a question.
It's on now.
Okay. So after the sessions for a summary document, does that mean, let's say there's a session tomorrow, do y'all post notes as well as a video? Because I think I saw some public comments that said downloading a video is sometimes difficult because they're so large.
Videos can
We usually don't post notes from our public meetings, but we'll have materials that are the same across every meeting that we can certainly share online. Folks who can't come to the meetings also will have the opportunity we're working on putting a little video online if folks want to stream it that way, or download the PDF summary document. One of the members of the PEO subcommittee really focuses a lot of her work on disability access. And so she's been helping us understand a lot of the more technical in and outs of how to properly label JPEGs for screen readers and those sorts of things.
But I do want to say that I think that's a valid concern. I think if you're asking people to attend multiple meetings on different topics that do have some overlap, although, the ARPA conversation is larger because it could be used for a variety of things, and this is more narrowly focused on housing, is a lot to ask. So I think our focus in working with the Housing Commission's subcommittee is going to be how can we provide this information the most accessibly. So summary documents are key. I don't expect everybody to read a 70-page document. So making sure that we can summarize the document in itself and then provide opportunities for them to submit feedback to us when they can. So having an online form to be able to fill helps them to be able to do that. They can read the document or the summary document and provide their comments online. They don't need to physically be in attendance at a meeting. So that was kind of our focus, is to be able to provide more options and opportunities for people to understand and provide comments.
Oops. Got it. And of course, I'm just going to push back a little bit on that with the notes, because with SA Speak Up around the city budget, you can see what other folks post online. So I worry when we say we have an ARPA meeting and we haven't heard that housing is something that the community wants. I don't think that's true, right? So I just want us to be careful that if somebody can't attend a meeting and say housing, right, that they're not wanting that funding to go towards housing. So that's what I'm trying to figure out, how to get that better aligned. And if it's possible to share notes, I'd rather us ask the question to GPA and see how that's possible, right? And and that goes to one of the strategies, right, of transparency and accountability as well.
Yeah, we'll work to see how we can provide summaries of our meetings, and then we'll work with GPA on what we can do on the other side, on those other meetings, how we can have a connection there.
Gotcha. And then I have two more. So one, I really like that the UTSA Westside Community Center space is listed as an option. It is a small space though. And so what's the backup plan if there are too many people for the space to be in there?
That's a good question. If I'm not sure what the capacity of that room is.
Hi, Commissioner. We've had meetings in there before that we haven't had overflow issues for. So I think we can talk to some of the neighboring organizations about what they might welcome. But both of these meetings are also virtual. So probably our plan would be, you know, if you have a way to attend virtually, we would encourage maybe overflow to do that.
Okay, and then on the outreach one, I didn't see TV news on there, just social media, online stuff. I know a lot of folks get their information or see calls to action on the television for nightly news. So I don't know if we could add that in English and in Spanish. And just something simple, right? If there's an easy website or a phone number that you want people to call into, if we could add that, that'd be cool.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion, Commissioner. We'll work with our GPA department on that as well, see how we can get the word out through local news.
Gotcha. And then the last question I had was on slide 22, where under funding sources, additional resources, city-owned assets. Can you help me with that and give like an example? Does that mean city-owned assets in terms of buildings that could be converted into housing, or what does that mean?
Well, that is a possibility, but what we were looking at more is city-owned land. Good example is the Southeast Service Center we're developing for housing. There's a previous service center. We're looking at redeveloping it into housing and commercial activity. So where we can leverage city resources, you know, not all of those are known right now. Sometimes there's redevelopment opportunities. Sometimes the city does dispose of assets. So working very closely with our department who oversees that to see if there are any opportunities to say work with the housing trust on, you know, potentially land banking a piece of property, turning it into community land trust, or, you know, using it, leveraging it for affordable housing development.
Got it. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question that coincides with what Commissioner Kiemer said? First of all, the ticker tape at the bottom for the TV news would be great for that. But when she was talking about the different meetings, since they're different meetings because it's different subjects, for those that a lot of people do have a lot of trouble doing the virtual, so they have to attend in person. I don't know if it's too late to ask this, Jeff, but is it possible for those attending those meetings, if they are VIA writers, that they can get free transpo there? Like they're not charged to get to those meetings?
That's possible. It would take an act of my board to do that.
Okay, is that a hard act? Is that what you're saying?
Well, my board doesn't meet again until the middle of November.
Okay. I would like to say for future meetings like that be considered as far in advance as possible to be presented, because there are a lot of people that cannot get on virtually and they do try, or they have very low bandwidth, and so it's just too much. And by the time they finally log on, it freezes, and they really want to participate, because for something like this, we have meetings coming up where Vero Soto was mentioning, they're the people who kind of vote. They'll say what they want this money to go to, but if they can't get there, they can't have a voice, and that really concerns me. So if at all possible, and when those meetings are being talked about and y'all are planning them, please can y'all coordinate with them so they can get there for free?
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And in the future, we'll make sure to work very closely with Commissioner Arndt on how we can organize that. The other thing I'll say is what I think Beto was saying is, you know, they're going to get community feedback on how that money is spent. I don't think they're going to be taking a formal vote at the meeting. I'm sure there will be opportunities to provide feedback online. And we can provide that to the commission as a follow-up email on how the residents are going to be interacting with that process, because I think that's information that would be relevant to all of us.
And I understood that there wasn't going to be a vote, but again, if they can't do anything virtually online, in person's going to be their only way to do it. But if they cannot afford to be making these trips, that is a big, big concern. I know it's $2 or whatever, but that's $2 for somebody, and then $2 more to get back home. That's coming out of their food budget, and it's expensive to buy groceries now. So that does concern me.
Understood.
And Commissioner, also one thing that came out at the PEO planning was a discussion about, I know this doesn't fix the cost part, trying to connect with the VIA buses, especially for the UTSA, to make sure that they knew that the meeting was happening and which building entrance to drop people off at. So that's something that our staff's working on as well.
Let me, Ed, did you have a comment? Commissioner?
Yes, thank you. If you could pull up slide 23. So, Ian, I appreciate you talking about the public housing, San Antonio Housing Authority funds that are received from HUD. I just wanted to, and you did mention these are for preservation. I just wanted to note the magnitude of what type of maintenance we're talking about. The last study we did called for over $300,000 of deferred maintenance. So receiving 50 to 100 million is just a small fraction of what's actually needed to help preserve our public housing. And this is basically because HUD has underfunded public housing across the nation for several decades. So I just wanted to point out that these funds will never be available for new construction because they're absolutely needed for preserving existing units. And I have a question about an item you mentioned on slide 21. So in the last statement, you're talking about leveraging the funds. And I would like to better understand what you mean by leveraging, because funds can be leveraged in multiple ways. For example, creation of 30% units in a market rate project is one way, but creating more 30% units while you're already creating 30% units is another way that leverage can be created. And I think the value of creating additional 30% units when you're already producing affordable housing should receive more points, so to speak, than putting a few 30% units in a market rate complex. So can you tell us a little bit what you're thinking about as far as leverage?
Absolutely. And to answer your question, I think, and your first point is absolutely on point. We did speak with representatives from SAHA during our SHIP process, and they definitely stressed the importance of the need for additional funds beyond what they currently receive from HUD. I think that's probably true for housing authorities across the country who are underfunded, especially one like San Antonio, who has some of the oldest affordable housing, public housing in the country. So I completely agree. To the funding plan and the leveraging, because we had a really good pipeline of data projects that we've already funded, we were able to look at, okay, when we provide gap funding, or let's just say $1 million of CDBG funding into a project, that is only a very small portion of the overall development cost. The majority of the funding that makes that possible are usually low-income housing tax credits. And so when we look at another larger funding sources, and so when we look at, adding additional funds to our affordable housing budget, we're looking at how much funding that we direct as a city is being leveraged by other resources. And I'm just using housing tax credits as an example. But you are right. If you are building affordable housing right now, and I think Pete can probably speak to this a lot, there are tools to be able to buy down additional rents for example, of new developments that are being created. And so that's something that we've looked at as well. We've looked at the cost to buy down rent, say from 50 or 60 to 30% AMI. And that's what helps us achieve some of these deeper and the great need at 30% AMI level. So we looked at both. We do know that there are some tax exempt projects that may typically, if they were to receive the tax exemption by itself, don't necessarily need to have any affordable housing. But I look at projects like the Continental Hotel that's being redeveloped, that's receiving some tax incentives through Bexar County, are including affordable housing units in there. And they're not, the deepest targeting or the greatest number, but they do play an important part, again, in providing more affordable housing. So we looked at all the tools that we had. Certainly, the greatest opportunity lies when you're building the affordable housing up front and adding or buying down rents to those 30% AMI levels. So that is something that we're looking as a strategy going forward on how we're going to achieve these targets. And so when we look at something like a housing bond, how can we leverage those units that are in the pipeline that are already being developed and making more of them affordable? That's more cost effective and, quite frankly, faster than having to build whole new projects. So that is something that we've looked at through this analysis.
Thank you. Looks like I'm enjoying this conversation, but it's going a bit long. So I don't know. Jeff, did you have any comments, or Pete? I think you didn't have a chance.
I had a couple of questions.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Just for my clarification, I'm operating under the assumption there's no such thing as a dumb question because I'm about to ask one. All right, so I'm looking at first of all, the new target is at 10 years starting now, or is that cumulative from the first 3 and the following 7?
Yeah, so that is starting now.
Okay.
So there are units that are in the pipeline that will be coming online. So we are going to count those, but these are a whole new 10-year target. So yes.
And so in 3 years you did almost 19,000, but in 10 years you're going to do 28,000. Is that correct? And what can you help me understand that difference?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think if you look at that, you're like, that math doesn't exactly add up. You will blow those out of the water. The key point here is that the targets are at much deeper AMI levels, and those require a lot of greater subsidy. We may go over raw numbers again, like we did this time, but the strategic housing implementation plan is targeted at those deeper AMI levels, which is what we'll be counting. We may get, a little bit more 60, and we may get some 80% units. But the hope is through tools like what Commissioner Hinojosa was talking about, buying down rents, being able to put more 30% units instead of those 60s, that we'll be able to accomplish this. But it does require more subsidy and funding.
Right, and I kind of figured that, but I need to ask you that question. Is the 28,094 whatever? How does that compare to need?
Yeah, and this is a part of the presentation that we gave last time. So of that need, those 95,000 households that we talked about, we're going to be addressing them through a variety of resources. So not all of them will be new production and preservation, which is what that 28,000 is focused on, specifically subsidized affordable housing. And we're going to be looking at providing that assistance. We're going to be looking at job training. And we're going to be looking at how we can stimulate the private sector to be able to help us. So through all of these interventions, we're looking to address that 95,000. And we will, again, continue to track all of these metrics going forward. So we'll know the progress that we're making as well as our partners.
Okay, so just to paraphrase that, in 10 years, you expect to have addressed all 95,000?
Yes, that is the SHIP approach.
Fantastic. Then the last thing I have is about outreach. First of all, I want to offer up that the buses have spaces for bus cards that they're often public announcements. And so those people that ride the bus could become informed of those, and they're either free or inexpensive. I'll just put it that way. And I'm going to offer that up. The second thing is the first meeting is only like 3 working days from now. So it seems like we're a little behind on the outreach from what I'm hearing. Maybe I'm not hearing it properly.
Yes, that is a pretty short turnaround for a meeting time, but we're hoping because we're going to be able to offer this meeting virtually, and because we have a pretty extensive network that we reach out to about a lot of events, that we'll be able to push this out and get very good attendance virtually.
You've already reached out to those? You have already reached out to those?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Pete, did you have something? Okay, Pete, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of items. First of all, just want to make sure that the materials that are to be drafted, they're available both in English and Spanish, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. I did want to echo the sentiments with respect to nonprofits. When we often talk about nonprofits, we're usually referencing the nonprofit builders, right? The folks, the affordable housing partners, like the Merced Housing who sit here on our commission, but also the acknowledgement that that is a focus on bricks and sticks, right? They also take care of supportive services that impact people, and I think that's very important. That needs to be acknowledged somewhere, at least in the narrative of the ship. And more profoundly is the extent of our healthcare community, our food insecurity nonprofits, folks who really assist with the wraparound type of services, childcare, education that are needed in these communities that we're trying to build and serve. So I want to make sure there's at least that acknowledgement somewhere in the shifts. And I wanted to hear, what is the coordination with the county with respect to now they're going through their housing planning process, and how is the SHIP going to relate to the county? I know that they are listed here in the SHIP program.
Yeah, we've been having pretty frequent conversations with the county. They are currently working on a plan that's specific to the county on how they can get more involved in housing and how they can coordinate a lot of their agencies around housing, and we're involved in that process. So we will see in their plan that will be brought to Commissioners Court a lot of alignment with the SHIP. So we're working very closely with them on those strategies that we've identified the county playing a role in, and they will be echoing that vice versa to the SHIP. So there will be connection to that, specifically with things like permanent supportive housing, the eviction process. There's, of course, will be focused more specifically on the county, their plan, but there will be a lot of overlap.
Thank you. And then finally, just want to acknowledge the fact that you did include city-owned assets as part of being part of that plan. I think it's also important to note that there are a lot of public entities besides just the city that own potentially excess land. We had a great learning experience in working with mission-oriented developments on availability of surplus land for affordable housing, and that's borne some fruit. And so I think it'd be worth it to talk with other public partners besides just the city on what available land assets there are. So I think that should be reflected in strategy as well.
Absolutely. And, land is definitely one of those components of development that has increased over time. And so wherever we can help, and land is a big one, we want to make sure we're leveraging our resources. So that's a very good point.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Well, this was a very great discussion. I'm sorry to move us along so quickly, but we do, did you have, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Johnson?
I wanted to get clarity real quick on something that Beto was speaking about earlier. The funding that she was referring to, she did say that it can be utilized for housing, but that's going to be dependent upon what the community says they would like to use it for. What was that funding again that she was referring to? And then I'll ask my question.
So that's the ARPA funding.
Thank you.
Yes, this is, and just to clarify to you, because I can understand the confusion, this is ARPA funding, but it's specific to home funds. And so it's a kind of a separate bucket, although it's, kind of part of the same.
Yes. So she was saying that, again, it could be utilized for housing, but that's going to be dependent upon what the community members decide. Would these be regular community members, or would these be community members that are heads of different organizations? Is this like open to the public?
Yeah, it's open to the public.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think for me, when she was talking, I was writing down, if we know that money has been moved from one area that needed it, and we know that money needs, like housing area, the housing area needs funding. Why is it that we're just not going to put that toward housing?
So I think that was the direction from the council, actually, to have those funds brought to the public for their input on how they would like it used. And so that's the process that we're currently undergoing. Now, could result in that funding being directed to housing, could be a variety of things. a variety of other uses. So I think we have to kind of go through that process to see, but that's why it's going out to the public process. It was at the request of the city council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So thank you very much for the briefing. Let's move us along because I know we have our guest that needs to leave at 1 o'clock. So, and we should end our meeting at 1 o'clock. We still have 2 more items. So let me go ahead and bring up the next item, number 3, briefing and possible action on removing barriers subcommittee appointments. And if we could have our presentation. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. So I'll go pretty quick. I know we're a little short on time, but really what we're doing today is picking up on the conversation we left off on at our special meeting on the 12th. So I'm going to go through a little bit of review on what the Removing Barriers Committee is, when they need to do this work, and then the meat of today's discussion is who is going to do that work. And we'll be asking you at the end of the presentation to take action on appointment of the subcommittee members. So just to refresh your memories, this was an ad hoc working group, the Removing Barriers Task Force, that was convened by the mayor's office. They met from July 2019 through about February 2020. And then their work went on hiatus through COVID-19 and the pause that DSD went through on their UDC amendments. We had 3 co-chairs of the group. One of them is with us today. That's Jim Bailey. Thank you, Jim. And 17 stakeholders, including at the time our Housing Commission chair. And that work was split across 3 subcommittees, one focused on regulatory cost burden, another on accessory dwelling units, and then lastly, public engagement and outreach. Next slide. So on the 12th, you all voted to formalize this subcommittee to pick up the baton, if you will, underneath the Housing Commission. So their charge is to identify regulatory barriers to affordable housing development and preservation, and then propose amendments in the UDC to DSD. Those are due on February 1st of 2022. Following that deadline, they will be working closely with DSD throughout the UDC development process, which is expected to go through about October 2022 when council adopts the new UDC. So in the short term, they'll also work on their ADU package, and in the long term, following council adoption of the UDC, really focusing on ways to make sure that other city plans align with the recommendations that they all present to you. So just a little closer look, I showed you this slide last time. The work of those first 2 removing barriers subcommittees are going to fall under this new Housing Commission subcommittee, and their public engagement and outreach efforts will go with your existing public engagement and outreach committee. Next slide. So when are they going to do this? Well, starting today, hopefully we will make appointments and begin meeting with them very quickly in December so we can get ready for some public outreach on this in January, conducted, of course, alongside our public engagement and outreach committee and present to you all at Housing Commission. DSD has a very hard deadline of February 1st for these amendments, so we're really up against it with that. Throughout the summer, the group will be commenting on other affordable housing related proposals and probably appearing before the PTAC, the Planning Commission Technical Advisory Committee, to defend the recommendations that we all make. And then lastly, in the summer, we also need to begin a public recruitment process for the next generation, if you will, of appointments to this. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then lastly, council adoption is expected in October. So also on the 12th, you made some decisions about the composition of your subcommittee. 9 total members, that's capped because there are only 9 commissioners and the subcommittee can't be larger than the body it reports to. 2 of those members will be commissioners and the other 7 are non-commissioned members. For terms, you decided that those initial terms of these first appointees will go through council adoption of the UDC. So we'll start our recruitment process like we did for the Public Engagement and Outreach Committee a few months before that, those terms end. So, and I'm gonna give a shout out to Jim here. Since the meeting on the 12th, Jim and Cynthia Spielman, another former co-chair, have been working to identify what kind of areas of expertise are really needed to make this commission work, this committee work. And they identified the following breakdown. It's a little bit different than what was presented in the memo, and I apologize for that. We've been moving a little quickly, so we shifted from 2 community representatives with technical expertise, from 3 to 2. And there are 3 development and affordable housing finance representatives. So I'll talk about who those are in a second. We have 1 architect representative, 1 accessibility representative, 1 small infill representative, and 1 engineering representative. And the reason for that is the work that this committee is doing is looking very closely at the UDC, and they need folks who are able to pick up the baton and keep running with those. But I want to note too that in the past iteration of the committee, and this is really the chair, Jim Bailey's intention to carry forward, is that even the folks who are the 9 appointees who are accountable to bringing the vote to you, they can be joined by members of the public who are welcome to participate in these meetings, to comment in these meetings and have their concerns addressed in these meetings. So it's not a closed process. We welcome public engagement on that. Next slide. So here's who we're proposing to you to consider today. Your 2 community members are Nikki Johnson on the Housing Commission and Jordan Gawi, who's of Beacon Hill and the Tier 1 Neighborhood Association. In Development and Affordable Housing Finance, you have Commissioner Alanis, Jose Gonzalez II, who does development consulting specifically for affordable housing, and Monique Chaboya, who is with McCormick Barron Salazar, and she's also here. Welcome, Monique. Jim Bailey will chair this subcommittee. Melanie Coffin with Disability SA will speak on behalf of the Accessibility Disability Community. She is also part of the Public Engagement and Outreach Committee, along with Commissioner Johnson. So we're really excited about the nexus between those 2 groups there. Michael Taylor with Cross Timber Homes of Habitat will also participate doing small infill. And lastly, Taylor Allen from WGI, who was part of the last Removing Barriers group. Next slide. So here's time for action and discussion. We've put the motion language on the screen for you, so it'll be a little bit easier than last time. So before maybe we go into this, I don't know, Jim, would you like to say a word?
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. So yeah, it's been kind of a whirlwind process over the last couple of weeks. As you know, we've got some pretty hard deadlines coming up on us, and I would like to thank each of you for participating as you have, and particularly the chair for helping walk us through this. You know, I'm really looking forward to next year when we can do an open call. You know, and be really sort of deliberative about ensuring we've got the right composition of this group. But I want to ensure you, and Cynthia does too, that while she's not going to join, she's asked Jordan to serve in her place. That what we have is we've established a consensus-based process, right, where everyone sits around the table and we all chew through the issues as community members and as professionals. And we don't walk away and develop recommendations until there's consensus from everybody in the room. And that includes the folks who are showing up who aren't voting members. So, you know, we're ready to get to work on behalf of the commission, you know, as your advisory body, if you'll have us. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Jim. And we do have one other commissioner in the House, Monique Chaboya. Could you just at least stand in so we can acknowledge you, and can you take off your mask so I can see your face? Just so at least we can thank you for your willingness to serve on the committee. No, I know. Mostly it's just so, and really the whole purpose is just so we can thank you for your willingness to serve, as all these people serve as volunteers, as do all of us here on the dais as well, serve as volunteers on behalf of the mayor. And our whole community. So thank you so much for being here today and your willingness to serve on this committee. Thank you. So I think, you know, we had a briefing on this. We know that there is some urgency as to why we're doing it this way. So if there are no further questions, if I could get a motion to approve. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the slate of nominees here on the Removing Barriers to Affordable Housing Subcommittee. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Oh, gotcha. Okay. We're good, right? We're good. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, commissioners, also for your willingness to serve on this committee and for all the time that you will spend. I know it's a very technical group, and I suspect meetings will be long. So, and speaking of long meetings, we still have one item. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I call for a vote? I did. Right? Did I say? Oh, okay. We got through that part. Okay, good. We still have one more item, but it is already 1 o'clock. Thank you very much, Jen. The last item, and Monique for being with us today, is the briefing on the housing tax credit policy updates. Is that time sensitive?
Yes, it is going to PCDC, but it's also only a briefing. So if you all would prefer to take this via the PowerPoint presentation in your packet, we can accommodate that.
Well, can you do it in 10 minutes? You think so? Okay, well, let's try. And if we, anyway, it's a briefing. If we lose the quorum, we lose the quorum. People can get on about their business. But let's try and at least hear it. And I'm sure that you needed some feedback before you present to the committee tomorrow. So go ahead and I'll turn it over to, are you going to get there? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I will be speedy. Today is, as Sarah mentioned, just a briefing on the proposed changes to the housing tax credit policy. So you've heard Ian interchangeably refer to housing tax credits throughout his SHIP presentation and low income housing tax credits, or LIHTC. That's because he's actually referring to the same program, but sometimes we get that confusion from the community. It started in the 1980s and has become one of the major ways that we can build affordable housing nationally as well as in San Antonio. But it is administered at the state level. And so here in Texas, that's the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. And they're responsible for writing the rules and overseeing compliance to make sure that high development standards are maintained, and they do annual inspections for us. These tax credits can both be rehab and new construction, and there's two ways to do it. There's the competitive 9% that it covers more of the development costs, runs once a year, but there's fewer projects that can be done. Usually in San Antonio, we get 3, maybe 4 projects. And then there's the 4% non-competitive tax credit that happens on a rolling basis as credits and funds are available. And those are usually your larger developments. And we usually see about 10 to 13 awarded in San Antonio a year. So the city's role in this and why we're updating our process and our policy is we get the first say. We get to issue resolutions of support or no objection for these projects. And that is what the developer needs to take to the state to say the city's okay with us moving forward should you award the tax credits. But even if we, as a city, issue those, they're not guaranteed because TDHCA does a full vetting of all of these projects. On the bottom is the annual 9% timeframes. Just as I mentioned, those are time-bound, which is why we're time-bound as well for updating this policy. And we do this every 2 years to make sure that we are in line as closely as possible and not working in contradiction to what TDHCA is doing, but also to align with the city and our goals as well. On the screen, and I'll just let you look at that real quick because we are time bound, is what we've gone through. We've worked with the development community. We've had a public survey. We've had a public meeting, and we've been providing materials in your packets for since August about our process and where we are, as well as TDHCA. Because of the 9%, we do need to get this approved by council next month. I included this so that you know that the SHIP is one of those things that we're making sure does align with the work we're doing. So like I mentioned at the beginning, this is our major way of getting affordable units on the ground, both in rehab and new construction. We'll be continuing to urge deeper affordabilities in the 30, 40, and 50% range. All of the tax credit developers agree to not permanently displace their residents. They do submit, if they are going to be temporarily displacing any of their residents, a plan to us that shows budget and everything. They accept housing choice vouchers. They agree to the non-discrimination ordinance and the notice of tenants' rights ordinance when they submit their application. And so we're also working to give more points in our evaluation for when a developer agrees for meaningful on-site services. So what we're talking about there are your full-time coordinators. They'll get more points for having financial classes and those kinds of services more than a notary being available. And then we have added and focused on transportation routes being tied specifically to points, as well as being in job centers and regional centers. With that, these are the ways that we are proposing to score tax credit projects for the next 2 years. On the screen, you see the 2020 points. That's the ones that have guided us for the last 2 years. And the recommendation. Based on the feedback we've gotten so far, we've added 2 categories. That's the use of local businesses and contractors. That's both in resident services and building. And then we've also added a transportation category specifically. Before it was tied under as an option for targeted areas, but now we've called it out specifically. And to balance those points, we're recommending taking a few points out of the owner experience level category and the project readiness categories. That's it. Did it.
Thank you. But it's actually really important. So of course, if anybody needs to leave, that's fine. But I had a couple of questions. So you have here proximity to jobs, but does that mean it's in the regional center? And why not use regional center versus proximity?
So these are 2 different areas. So the targeted, you have different options. So regional centers is how you get to 10 points, but let's say you're in a TERS instead, that's worth 8 points. So the regional centers the most. The proximity to jobs measures against to match what TDHCA does, and that's how close are you to a certain number of jobs. And so we have a lower, let's say 1,000 jobs, you get 1 point. But if you're close to 13,000 jobs, you get the 5 points. And it's within a radius of a mile.
Sorry, I was looking at the wrong level. So transportation, I guess that implies public transportation. Okay. All right, let me turn it over. Any questions from my colleagues about changes? Okay, Commissioner Pete, Commissioner Alanis.
Thank you. Just for clarification, what is the minimum score necessary to receive a recommendation?
For a resolution of no objection, which is what our 4% are going for, rarely are 9%, that's a 60. And to get a resolution of support, it's a 75.
Has that scoring threshold changed since the last time this was announced?
Oh, I should say that out loud for minutes. No.
Is that all, Commissioner?
Yeah, and that was my only question. I want to see if there was any movement on the thresholds. I understand that most of these projects will score pretty high and that there are other protections involved and other preferencing involved, especially if they come to the housing trust, if they come to any of our other programs, we can instill a little bit higher level of preferencing these deals. So, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Johnson?
Actually, Commissioner Alanis asked part of the question, what is the lowest amount of points and what's the highest?
So technically, you could receive 0 points if you don't meet any of these criteria. But it's up to 100 points, so that's to keep it easier for our scoring purposes.
Thank you.
Any other questions here? No. Okay. And so just one follow-up question. These are for city projects or also regional, like in the unincorporated Bear County?
So these are for both. For a project that is in the ETJ, they would just have to go both to the county to receive a resolution and to the city.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. Thought that might be a long discussion, so I guess it was. So, okay, well, that's the items that we have. And we did, Beto, I haven't given you an opportunity the last couple of meetings, but it looks like we still have a quorum here. Did you have a director's report? So first, let me thank the team for the wonderful presentations. We have wonderful staff in our department who are excellent. So first, thank you. Great job, all of you. We do have the follow-up from the questions you asked last time. And so the main thing is that you all wanted to make sure you got a copy of the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan. And so I hope you all have it. If any of you would like a printed copy, let us know so we can print it for you. We know it's a long document, and so we will make sure you get a printed copy of that so you don't have to print that document. So just let us know, but the questions revolve around that. And I know you all wanted an essay ready to work presentation. For the interest of time, we'll have to reschedule that, but that will be something that we'll do as an option for a later meeting. So that's item 1. Second, just like Allison presented on the housing tax credit program policy changes, just wanted to let you know and let the community know, since I know that a lot of folks do tune into this meeting, that we are contemplating making some program changes to our HUD-funded programs for affordable housing. And so I just want to go quickly through that. It is in your packet, but the program changes are a result of realizing we have higher costs for rehabs and that the average or the median home price in our community has changed. So we have limits for the HUD-funded programs. We are proposing to increase the limits to accommodate for this. For owner-occupied rehab, when we do a rehab, we want to increase the limit from 130K, that's the maximum we would put into it, to 145K. Again, recognition that construction costs have increased. When we have to do a reconstruction, we want to change that from current 130 to 145. So this is our owner-occupied rehab. Our investment would be increased because of the increased construction costs. For our first-time homebuyer program, our down payment assistance, we are going to change the maximum assistance. We're proposing to change from current $15,000 to $30,000. This is acknowledging that the median price in San Antonio has increased. So first-time homebuyers need more help for down payment assistance. And then for the homeownership housing development, we also want to increase the limit there. So our subsidy limit currently is $50,000. We want to increase that to $75,000. Again, acknowledging that deeper subsidies needed because of increased construction costs. So that's something that will be presented to the Planning Redevelopment Committee, going to Council mid-November. We will have public input online starting November 1. And we are targeting to go to PCDC November 18th and City actually at City Council, will go to PCDC November 8th. But that's just so you all are aware of what we're considering and for the public to be aware. So that's the second item here. Then the next item, actually we already talked a little bit about this. We talked about the home program that has $20 million in funds. There is a recommendation for permanent supportive housing there. But I mentioned earlier the additional about 200 million in state and local recovery funds. There was a presentation October 20th at a B session about that. Commissioner Johnson asked about the public meetings. That is going to be posted online. They haven't finalized the meetings. City Council did want more public meetings. They asked, I think they only had one Saturday, and they said, you need more than one Saturday session. So I think we're gonna be more than 8 public meetings throughout the city. As soon as those get posted, we will share that with you. We'll share it with our Public Engagement and Outreach Committee of the Housing Commission as well. And we'll put that, a link to that in the newsletter that will come out this week as well. And in your packet are the specific categories that the ARPA state and local recovery funds can be used. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, this money is supposed to support public health expenditures to address COVID-19 mitigation efforts, medical expenses, behavioral health care, public health and safety of the staff. Supposed to address negative economic impacts caused by the public health emergency, including economic harms to workers, households, small businesses impacted industries, and the public sector. So that's where housing households comes in. To replace revenue from the public sector, to provide premium pay for essential workers, to invest in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure, and investments to improve access to clean drinking water, support wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, and expand access to broadband internet. And so those are some of the categories. And there's programs and policies and services that can receive this funding. So housing is a category that can receive it, mortgage assistance, EHAB, development, those kind of investments. And there's guidance that council has set. They want to ensure we stabilize our budget, have revenue loss recovery, and address immediate community needs. And so those meetings are scheduled to commence early. There will be meetings and another B session, and then go to council in January. So just wanted to share that. If you want to talk offline about the ARPA funds, I'm happy to do so, but as soon as that schedule is published, we'll go ahead and do that, and we will make sure we work with GPA to get media coverage on that as well. And then last slide, just we're very busy with a lot of meetings. This doesn't even include the ARPA local state and recovery funds, but we do have Planning Community Development tomorrow, 2 meetings in November 8th and 15th. We have a couple items there. We have a B session on the Strategic Housing Implementation Plan, November 3rd. Community meetings, we have some ARPA input meetings. We put the ones that we know for certain, but again, there'll be a lot more meetings than the ones you see here. We have the housing bond about to start. The meetings have been scheduled, so we just put 2 of the 3 meetings for November 3rd, November 17th. We have the SHIP public meetings that Ian went over as well. And then your next regular Housing Commission meeting, November 17th at the Saha boardroom. Thank you, Commissioner Hinojosa, for hosting us then, 11:30 a.m. And that concludes the director's report, unless you have any questions for me. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And if there are any questions for Beto? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
I just have one clarification, and that's following along in the hard copy, which is page 27, slide 53. In the hard copy, if people are going to hang on to this.
There's a typo.
Yeah, it's a typo of $230 million instead of.
There is a typo. So it's 20 million in the home ARPA, but there's over 200 million in the state and local recovery funds. So I think that's where the typo came from on screen and on WebEx, it does only have 20 million for home ARPA. The additional funding is the state and local, so I think we got both confused.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On slide 51, which is the proposed changes to the maximum assistance limits, I want to thank y'all for recognizing the increase in costs and the impact that it's having, especially in our older neighborhoods, which need greater amount of repair, typically historic structures, things of that nature. What I would probably recommend is a mechanism to allow that maximum assistance limit to increase over time. Because I know from a public standpoint, getting approval to increase those maximums, if you don't have a pre-approved limit, you have to wait, you have to go to a process, and folks are still waiting to get the project approved. So if there is a way to put some sort of automatic increase with inflation or versus some sort of construction index or what have you, go ahead and just recommend that. So thank you very much for recognizing the increases in need.
Well, thank you so much, Veta, for the presentation, and also for all of my commissioners for hanging in there a little bit longer. So thank you all very much and have a great day.